Museum opens its activity 2012 with an exhibition of Claire Fontaine. We are always very attentive to show our collections, but at the same time we also want to touch subjects of actuality in our temporary exhibitions. In this case, the exhibition Macchinazioni of a collective. Claire Fontaine lives in Paris and defines herself as a ready-made artist. What does it mean? Ready-mades are objects that normally exist and then they change their significance when they are in another context. And also Claire Fontaine in her works very often refers to the works of other artists. Like in the case of Carl Andre, we had the exhibition of Carl Andre before in our museum with his floor pieces where the people could walk on, and in this case the floor piece has become a wrestling mat. Or Lever, the sculpture that Carl Andre presented in 1967, now has a new aspect. It means that the bricks now have a new cover, the cover of the book of Gilles Deleuze, Différence et Répétition. What does Deleuze say in that book? Very briefly, that in history, themes repeat themselves, but in every repetition there is a small difference. This happens also in the work of Claire Fontaine, which is very often direct, maybe also aggressive, but wants also to point out actuality at the same time more universal themes. Let's talk about some slogans you can find in their work, like Arbeit macht Kapital, that obviously can refer as a sentence to a capitalistic system, but at the same time reminds us also to the words that we saw above the lagers. Stranieri ovunque, fremde überall, foreigners everywhere, which is very specific for our South Tyrolean situation, which is bilingual, but at the same time also wants to point out the foreigners, the people who work in the shadow. Somebody doesn't notice, but they make the, let's say, the hard work. But we can also be foreigners to ourselves in our places. So from one point of view, Claire Fontaine tells us something about specific situations, but then what I like in the work and what I also would like to share with the visitors is that they also find a kind of utopia. That means the art space allows still this place for utopia, allows reflection that aren't allowed in other places. And here comes the figure of the assistant. Claire Fontaine also intends herself as assistant. Those people quoted also in Giorgio Agamben who work hard and sometimes are even not aware about their mission, but then they help to find at some point a dimension of safety.
Claire Fontaine presents her first solo show in Italy, in Museum. The title is Macchinazioni, Machinations, literally. There are several pieces, some of them are new, some of them have already been presented. Amongst the new pieces there is Italy Burnt and Burnt, which is the shape of Italy reconstructed with several thousands of matches planted in the wall. It can be presented burnt or unburnt. In this case in Museum it is presented unburned, so it is a work that conceals a potentiality, a possibility, because anyone could set fire on it, although museum doesn't really wishes that this happens, but it is a possibility that the work has. It's a work that speaks about the political instability and the political problems of the country. There are also 3 machines. One of them has already been presented in Paris last year. there. It's a recession sculpture constituted of a gas counter, a French gas counter, and a vacuum cleaner that blows air inside the gas counter and so erases the consumption of gas because it brings it back to zero. So it's these machines, the three of them have a kind of paradoxical way to function, which is self-referential, but at the same time it's slightly absurd because it does consume energy in order to keep going. So there is another machine which is derived from a modified gadget of Lehman Brothers, a Newton cradle. So the balls, the iron balls, keep moving like in a sort of artificially built perpetual movement that we have created through a magnetic field. This work is called the invisible hand. It obviously refers to the hand that should regulate the market but doesn't, the one described by Adam Smith in his famous book. The third machine is the Lorentz fountain, which is a behavioral model that we have translated into sculpture from sketches that we had found of it. It's essentially a reservoir of water that drips down according to the pressure with a balance that is the result of the pressure of the water in the reservoir and a weight that is applied at the end of the machine.
You need a weapon too. I would advise you to take a weapon too. Simple car key, this finger, and the other one I put in between. Then right now I have a stabbing device. I can go right straight to the face, and I promise you, that will hurt.